My name is Sarah Marie Jordan. I'm a professor at the School of Advanced International Studies at Johns Hopkins University. And this work, entitled Quantifying the Life Cycle Ecosystem Services Values of Electricity Generation in the US Chihuahuan Desert, is a collaboration with my former student Jacob Lee and two professors at Hendrix College, Maureen McClung and Matthew Moran. Energy development involves land-intensive activities. And it can be land-intensive because it contributes to not only the conversion, but also the fragmentation of landscapes. This comes at a time that there's increasing concern that the remaining areas of intact habitats or high biodiversity regions could be impacted. And a lot of this is rooted in the diversification of energy sources as well as its growth and what this means for land impacts. Ecosystem services, which are the goods and services that human populations source from nature, are one way or one lens to quantify such impacts. In addition, the life cycle land requirements of energy technologies themselves remain unresolved, and they can also be variable across regions. And generally, there's been limited data to quantify and compare what these land requirements look like. And so far, there are relatively few applications to understanding the impacts to ecosystem values that examine different energy technologies from a life cycle perspective. The purpose of this study is to quantify the life cycle surface land requirements and the costs of ecosystem services disruptions in a comparative analysis of natural gas, solar, and wind-oriented electricity generation and the infrastructure that's associated with it in the study area that we examine. The Economics of Ecosystems and Biodiversity Framework, or TEEB, is a global development or a global initiative that has been with the goal to develop a structured method to evaluating ecosystem services. In its initial publications, there is a robust data set of just over 1,300 values from 267 publications that characterize biome-level ecosystem services value. So this biome-level approach includes four main categories of ecosystem services: provisioning, so that would be, for example, food production; regulating, and within the example of carbon storage; habitat, so that could, for example, be related to genetics or gene pool protection; and cultural services, so that could be, for example, recreation and aesthetic. There is no consensus on the use of a single of the many frameworks for valuing ecosystem services in life cycle assessment. But more broadly, in other analyses, TEEB is a commonly used and accepted framework. The study area we examine is the Chihuahuan Desert in the United States. The Chihuahuan Desert is more than 350,000 square kilometers that covers north-central Mexico and the southwestern United States. It's the second largest desert in North America, and it's among the most biodiverse deserts, for example, of particular importance to endemic species of cactus and fish. There are diverse habitats, notably large areas of shrublands, grasslands, and woodlands. The inset here shows the extent of the Chihuahuan Desert in the United States and in Mexico. The study area that we examine here is the US portion. And this is important because a recent study that was published in 2017 used the TEEB framework to value ecosystem services for the region, while at the same time there are many energy developments and projects that are ongoing in the region. This slide shows the systems boundaries and also the scope of our analysis. The scope includes electricity generated from natural gas, wind, and solar energy. The system's boundaries include the fuel supply and the electricity generated. The electricity generation stages, so that would be the power plants. Consistent with natural gas, we exclude the upstream material inputs for solar and wind. So that would include the silicon and the upstream material inputs. And that's because these have previously been proven to be insignificant in prior analyses. Our approach to determining the surface land requirements was for each of the power plants in the area, natural gas, wind, and solar. We determined the land required for each site. Now, we did this by measuring them manually or using literature estimates. We used literature estimates for the natural gas fuel supply and also for wind. For the natural gas fuel supply, these were recently developed in a study specific to the study area by my co-authors, Matt Moran and Maureen McClung. And for wind turbines, there were 934 in total, and we determined that there was a comprehensive database that was published by the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. And since we were using manual delineation techniques, we deemed that this was the most effective way to quantify the wind land disturbance. We then used these data to estimate the land use intensity by dividing the land use by the lifetime generation. This slide shows sample images from our analysis. So the one on the left is a solar farm that was determined in our area to be in our area, and the one on the right represents a natural gas fired power plant that we manually delineated. Our approach to determining the ecosystem services value, as mentioned before, relied on the TEEB framework. Ecosystem services values were determined for each of the habitat types in the area. So that included desert shrubland, desert grassland, and desert woodland. We overlaid the plant locations on EPA level 4 ecoregions and habitat types. We then leveraged the values that were determined by my co-authors in a study specific to the Chihuahuan Desert using the TEEB framework. The table here shows the ecosystem services values in dollars per meter squared, that is 2016 dollars, and the amount that of the proportion of each of the electricity projects that occur in each type of habitat that we determined by using spatial overlays. This slide shows the results for the life cycle land intensity as defined within the scope and the systems boundary diagram that I covered earlier. In panel A, you'll see that we have the land use intensity in meters squared per megawatt hour, and this is counted over the operating life of the power plant. What you'll also notice here is that wind ranks the lowest, followed by natural gas-fired power, followed by solar. Now, what this doesn't account for is that over time, the amount of natural gas wells that are required to continue to be drilled increases over time. So panel B disaggregates these values at an annual level and accounts for the fact that wells need to continue to be drilled to satisfy the production demand of the natural gas-fired power plant. In this case, you'll see that the natural gas after just under year 10 becomes the largest land consumer. And the ranking then goes solar, followed by wind. This slide shows the results for ecosystem services values. In panel A, you'll see that we have ecosystem services in 2016 dollars per megawatt hour. And it follows the same ranking as the land use intensity. And panel A again shows over the lifetime operation of the plant. Now, accounting for the same factors for figure B, we see a different trend. So In the first figure, you saw that as a piece of land is occupied, it's converted once, yet it continues to produce energy over time. As a result, the overall land use intensity of a solar farm or a wind turbine decreases over time. This figure B, this panel B, speaks to the fact that, of course, the values associated with that land don't necessarily diminish over time. Ecosystem services values are quantified on an annual basis, and each year those values are lost. So as more energy is produced, for example, for solar, the cumulative value increases in tandem with the generation of electricity, and similarly for wind. We observe the same trend in natural gas, with increasing over time as more natural gas wells are drilled, but only crossing over solar at just under 50 years. So certainly showing a different trend. We then quantified the same value, the cumulative ecosystem services over time, but also applied a discount rate of 3%. Now this we will be varying for the final paper to test the sensitivity, but of course we'll show the same trend. And shows that also just under year 50, natural gas crosses over wind, but weighting the values, the monetary values closer to earlier years as what discounting, the purpose of discounting. Of course, the prior values show the assumption that the discount rate would be 0. So in conclusion, the life cycle land use of wind and solar electricity generation is actually smaller than that of natural gas when considering the upstream land use of the fuel supply and also the cumulative land requirements over time. For all cases, wind turbines were found to have the smallest impact of all the 3 technologies. Our results suggest that the importance of reclaiming wells is very high as long as they were no longer in production. This, of course, would change the results. In this case, we did not consider the effects of reclamation due to the shorter time horizons. We will be testing a sensitivity in looking at a value that was derived by my collaborators, Matt Moran and Maureen McClung, that's in review right now, which showed that of the wells that have been abandoned within the region, only 16% of these wells have actually been reclaimed to date. The results for the ecosystem services values diverge from those from land since they are quantified as annual cumulative losses, whereas the land is only converted once. So this really speaks to the land that's lost, or the value that's lost associated with the land once it is converted. These losses increase incrementally each year for all generation types, but of course it also increases in tandem with increasing electricity generation, which is particularly notable for the case of solar and wind. In conclusion, this is a simple step towards characterizing the land use for one ecoregion that provides a baseline for more comprehensive studies that look at much larger areas and that cover more than one ecoregion. And such studies can certainly account for the spatial differentiation, regional diversity, and also these changes over time, moving towards better accounting for aspects such as reclamation. In terms of future research, our model does not yet account for the temporal changes in operational efficiencies. These could certainly be integrated into future analyses. Specifically, the degradation of solar and wind technologies over time is excluded, but the efficiencies of these plants have undergone substantial improvements over the past decade, which are expected to continue. So there's certainly a tension in both directions. The land for the natural gas supply chain and also for the wind turbine, due to the sheer number of the population, relied on prior studies. Future research should seek to implement big data and machine learning methods to collect primary data for all life cycle stages. If you haven't seen his presentation, I encourage you to attend my postdoc the postdoctoral fellow with my group, Dr. Tao Dai, who is presenting such methods that can be employed across different product systems. Finally, we examine only one snapshot year. Of course, the assessment of land requirements over time using satellite images or aerial images over numerous years would provide a better picture of how land uses change over time. I just wanted to highlight how exciting this virtual conference is this year. I look forward to interacting with you at the actual session, and thank you for your time. I also wanted to highlight you can contact me here, Sarah Jordan at jhu.edu, and my research group, the Energy Technology and Policy Assessment, or ETAPA group, has a website. Feel free to visit it. And this funding for this project came from a Johns Hopkins Catalyst Award. Thank you very much. I look forward to speaking with you.